Hello YouTube. This is my honest review of The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. As a background, I started the Wheel of Time series 3.5 years ago. I actually hadn't heard of it for an interestingly long time. When I first got into the whole sci-fi fantasy world, I read most of the Brandon Sanderson stuff, Cosmere stuff, before actually learning about this series. But once I did, I was super interested. Ended up reading the first 6 books, so Eye of the World, all the way until Lord of Chaos. Started Crown of Swords, but never finished because I couldn't handle the slog. It was just painfully long. I felt the pacing was just so slow. I essentially gave up. However, recently I decided to restart. The reason for this is because I think the first time I was reading the series, I was too impatient. Instead of taking my time, reading slowly, enjoying the book, I was just trying to get through. And I was always thinking, okay, how close am I to the end of the book? How many more pages do I have left? I want to be on the next book. I want to say I've read the whole series. But I've restarted with a new goal in mind, to take it slow, to enjoy it, to read every detail, because every detail in these books is in there for a reason. Robert Jordan is so meticulous and so particular and literal and detail-oriented and descriptive for a reason. And there's only somewhere between 700 and 715 chapters in all of the Wheel of Time, I think, even if you include New Spring. That means if you read just 2 chapters a day, and even if it's not even that crazy if you miss a couple days, 2 chapters a day, you can finish the entire series in less than a year. I'm a young guy. I can be that patient. Why would I not take less than a year, maybe around a year or a little more if I miss some days, and finish the series? I don't want to give up that easily. That being said, I actually just finished The Eye of the World today, like an hour ago. So obviously it was a reread. My initial thoughts, wow. The scope of this book and what it sets up in terms of the plot and how many different plot points that have yet to be developed, characters that have yet to be developed, backstories that have yet to be developed, histories, places, lands, characters in the world, just the scope in general. Yeah, wow is all I have to say. Massive. It's massive. Part of why I enjoy reading it is just being impressed at Robert Jordan's ability to keep all of that within his head, to flesh it out, to only reveal it in little spurts, to keep you kind of slowly learning more and more about the world and the characters as you go on. It's very impressive. I think each individual plot point of this book as well, I was more invested in, more so than the first time I read it, and I got more out of. I absolutely loved the prologue, the intensity that you feel and that you almost share with Lews Therin Kinslayer, or Lews Therin Telamon, as he slowly realizes what he's done in slaying all of his kin, thus getting his name Lews Therin Kinslayer. That wreaks havoc on his brain once he realizes that. Especially his wife, Ilyena, is super emotional and not necessarily heartfelt, but intense, violent yearning that you can almost feel coming through the pages. Robert Jordan describes it so intensely and takes care to describe it completely and fully. I think the prologue, the creation of Dragonmount, is just a great prologue to the Wheel of Time in general. This is also a good time to say that this review is not going to be spoiler-free. At least I'm not going to take care to make it spoiler-free. Who knows, maybe once I finish I'll not really have said anything that is a spoiler. But just warning you, if you haven't read the book. Then we get introduced to Emond's Field. Oh my goodness, I love Emond's Field. I want to live there. It's not so much, it's like the most jovial, happy, cheerful place. At points it is, but it's not, like Hogwarts where everything is magical and everything's okay and, it's all happy rainbows and sunshine. But it feels like home. Whether it's all of the sheep herding, the farmers, the blacksmiths, the village circle, the village council, I guess I should say women's circle. And overall, the key theme throughout the entirety of the book, that is the stubbornness of Emond's Fielders. And this kind of trait, their stubbornness, gets fleshed out more and described more of how it kind of came to be later when Moiraine tells the Emond's Fielders as they're leaving for their journey to Tar Valon about the history of Emond's Field, how it was once a great kingdom, Manetheren. When Moiraine tells this story, it is kind of the first big story and introduction to the history of the world that we get from the mouth of one of the characters. It is so enrapturing. Like, I was just like, this is awesome. Moiraine is probably one of my favorite characters in the whole book, at least this book. Rereading it, this part was so much more real to me, and I slowed down, like I said, and read it more carefully. And the fact that the Emond's Fielders had never heard of Manetheren, but their stubbornness, you can see it kind of comes from that blood that is still in them. But everything about Emond's Field, Winternight, Beltane, the peddlers, the merchants, the detail and consistency that Robert Jordan has applied to all kinds of people in his books is awesome. Like, Emond's Field feels like a real place. The Two Rivers people feel like real people. I think Robert Jordan just captures that so legitimately. From the beginning, we also get one of the biggest themes throughout this whole series, the kind of divide between men and women, and the kind of constant tension that is felt between men and women, whether it's Aes Sedai gentling men who are wielding the power, or if it's Women's Council versus the Village Council. It's really prevalent, and I know that some people don't like it, but I think just this book standing alone, my reread of it, I didn't really care. Maybe as the books go on, it'll get annoying. But I feel like every time it was brought up in this book, it was intentional and it wasn't harped upon to a point where I was getting frustrated. I think something I like about Robert Jordan is that themes like that and other adjacent themes, whether it's the kind of skepticism towards Aes Sedai, the fear of Balzamin or the Forsaken, whatever it is, these key themes get stressed over and over. And yes, that may get annoying, but it's for a purpose. And I feel like it's just unique to Robert Jordan's way of telling a story. He's just says things over and over, whether it's a character's internal monologue reminding themselves of it, whether it's Rand or another character getting annoyed at Nynaeve, or every time an Aes Sedai is in a scene, people are skeptical and want to burn her for a witch. Whatever it is, I almost sort of, at least again from this book alone, it just was familiar and reminded me, I guess, of why I loved this series the first time I read it, in a weird way. The whole story, from the time Moiraine leaves with the Emond's Fielders to get to what is originally supposed to be Tar Valon, ends up being the Eye of the World in the Great Blight. There was never a lull. The Emond's Fielders reaching Baerlon was awesome. It felt like, I don't know, just their emotions at seeing an actual city for the first time were so real. People bustling about with now to care for one another, not knowing each other's names, just the grand size of Baerlon, and the Emond's Fielders being awestruck at that was so cool to me. And when they reach Caemlyn later on, after going through Whitebridge, they're just, the places they arrived at getting larger and larger and larger. Again, just was fun to experience. You feel like you're there. Robert Jordan makes you feel like you're experiencing this world for the first time as well. Along the way, there are so many characters, and that's something that at points maybe stressed me out a little bit, but I actually ended up reading the glossary, which is in the back of each book, I think. There is a lot to keep up with, but again, that adds to how impressed I am at Robert Jordan and how large the scope of this series is. I love the Tuatha specifically. I think that's just such a cool concept that they're seeking for some song, and Robert Jordan kind of describes it in a way that's pretty vague. You never really hear specifics of like the history of that or why or what they're specifically looking for. You just know that it is a song, and you know that the traveling people, the Tinkers, will know it when they hear it. And I think Perrin and Egwene and Elias, the time they spent with them was super cool. Perrin learning that he can communicate with wolves and slowly becoming almost wolf-like more and more as a man throughout the story, I feel like was well paced. And obviously I've already read a few books after this one, so I know some of what comes of this, but that was cool to read again. The last meeting with the Green Man, after we've been introduced to Loial, which also Loial as a character, awesome. I love his love for books. He's just such a kind, he's a gentle giant figure. And it's being reintroduced to him was awesome. But yeah, the last scene where the Green Man kills Balthamel in an attempt to save everyone, and then Rand has his last encounter with Agenor, and then subsequently Balsamon, was so momentous. Like, everything to do with that scene was so... I was hooked. I think I read like the last 130 pages of this book in like one sitting. I think if I had to give a complaint about this book this shortly after reading it, it would be, though, just kind of still how many unknowns there kind of are, especially when, whether it's Mat or Rand or Perrin dreaming of Balsamon or having some sort of encounter with him, kind of things that Balsamon is saying or talking about, whether it's hinting that Rand has had a past life where Balsamon has already faced him, or naming Forsaken by name, or just any kind of person by name that we haven't met yet. Sometimes the, I guess, vaguity of that is kind of maybe a little annoying to me, because it still seems like we have so much to learn, and sometimes it seems like Balsamon or some of the other characters, Moiraine, are talking about a bunch of things that we don't know anything about yet. But honestly, I think, again, that just goes back to how massive of a scope this series has. And obviously, this is the first book out of 14. What am I to expect? If I had to say favorite characters so far, I would probably say top three are Mat, Moiraine, and Loial. Out of the three main guys, Perrin, Mat, and Rand, I like Mat the best, just because I like the comedic aspect and how, you know, you can tell he really does not want to be a hero, but he's still indissolubly linked to the whole story, whether it's, you know, he's still, by the end of this book, not healed of the sickness of Mashadar within him that he obtained from Shadar Logoth with the dagger. And we can also see him gaining certain skills from Tom, like juggling and other things that a Gleeman does, hinting kind of at Mat going more down that direction. Moiraine just obviously being, you know, the Gandalf, Dumbledore, whoever you want to name figure, kind of the overpowered character. But we still see her at points where she's not super powerful. It's not the Age of Legends anymore. Magic doesn't work the way it used to. Her power drains her, but she's always calm and she always knows what to do. I also just love her reliance on the wheel and the pattern and the web and time and the true source as an entity in itself, and how she always knows what to do, but she always has some healthy reliance on kind of the sovereignty of the wheel. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills. That's one of my favorite things that Moiraine says in this book, because I think in general, as a person, I like to think about real life, of how events happen are totally within God's sovereignty, but human beings still make choices, even if those choices were preordained or foreordained by God. I don't know how much Robert Jordan was trying to tie in themes, at least of a religious nature like that, into this book, but whenever Moiraine kind of discusses those things, it reminds me of that concept, and I think it plays out really cool in the story, especially with characters being kind of drawn into the pattern, because the three main men are Ta'veren and they can't help being a part of the story, and Moiraine just kind of lets it happen. I remember when Rand first tells Moiraine that Loial is coming with them, she just calmly says, "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills." Loial, I just love the idea of Ogier, but also how, at least in this book, he's the only one we really meet and get to talk to, and his love for books just kind of reminds me of myself. And yeah, he's just a gentle giant, cuddly dude. I guess I'm making a lot of Harry Potter references for some reason, but it reminds me of Hagrid in that sense. Those are probably my 3 main characters. Favorite characters. Overall, I think I'm going to give this book a 9 out of 10. I'm super impressed by the scope, the world building, the characters, and even if it's not almost my forte at certain points, how impressed I am at it makes me want to keep reading and just get lost in the world. And again, my journey to finishing this series, multiple friends of mine who have told me that it's worth it. And my only complaints, again, kind of being almost weirdly the same reason. Just the scope is so massive that sometimes it's easy to kind of forget things or get lost in it. But I think anyone who reads this, unless you're annotating or leaving sticky notes in your book, that's going to happen. And I don't want to do those things. I don't think I will need to do those things. And 9 out of 10, super great introduction into this series. I recommend it if you have the time on your hands. So that's my review of The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Thank you for watching. More reviews to come soon.